Hello founders, and welcome back to my Ensemble Startup Series. I'm Robert and I'm so excited that you are here. Today we're going to talk about the basic budgeting process and a little bit about money when it comes to ensembles. And so a lot of people either find this very easy or very difficult depending on what their other life experiences have been. If you've kept a personal budget or a budget for your family, then you can take all the lessons that you've learned from there and apply them to your ensemble. If you've never done a budget before, this will be new and you may find it a bit challenging at first. But this is something that a skill that you can learn and then apply to other places in your life. It's really valuable to keep a personal budget, for instance. So there are a couple of general things to keep in mind with this. The first is that you want to keep all of your receipts. You need to know how much you're spending all the time. At the same time, you want to keep track of any income that you have coming in. So let's say you're going to take the $100 that your grandmother gave you and put it towards the ensemble. You need to keep track of that. Now, to keep track of that, there are a lot of different options. There are the big kind of accounting programs like QuickBooks, which is really popular and can be good because when it comes to tax season, then it does a lot of the conversions for the forms and whatnot for you automatically. What I generally like to use though is just something as simple as Excel or Google Sheets. And now with both of these, there are a lot of nuances and statisticians can do a lot with them. But all you really need to know are the basic functions. How to do a basic formula, for instance, inputting, those sorts of things. And most of that stuff you can find tutorials for online. So I would recommend just getting something that you feel comfortable with the key goal being that you need to keep track of all of your expenses and income. Another thing to keep in mind is that you may want to hire an accountant. And what this does is it makes tax season easier for you and it relieves you of all of the burden for kind of keeping track of everything. At the same time, it is your responsibility as a founder to know where all of this money is going and where it's coming from. So you at least need to have a kind of a specific overview, if that makes sense, and not just outsourcing it to an accountant. Now with this, of course, if you're just starting a smaller ensemble, even up to say 15 people, realistically you probably won't need an actual accountant to deal with this. There are a lot of expenses, but they're all things that you can manage. If you're dealing with a full orchestra, there are also a lot of expenses. As long as you are specific and detailed where all those expenses are and where the money is coming in, then you still don't really need an accountant until tax season. But it's one thing to consider, and you may find it valuable if you happen to have the money. For most of us as startups, we just don't have that kind of cash, and so it's up to you as the founder to keep track of all the money, and ultimately you will be legally responsible for it. Next, let's start talking about the budgeting process. First, what I want you to do is make a list of all potential income sources. So think about donations, investments, ticket sales, fundraisers, anything that you can think of that you intend to do, that would be possible for you to get an income for. And just jot all of these down. And later you'll put these into your spreadsheet. And I'll have an example in the description below. One really important thing to keep in mind is that you should not put a bunch of your own money into the startup of your ensemble. And now it's okay to give a little bit just to kind of get some traction or something. And obviously this is determined by your own personal finances. However, the temptation will be to always bail out your ensemble. And at the end of the day, what you're looking for is outside support. You cannot eternally sustain your ensemble just through your own investment. And unless maybe if you're super rich. Otherwise, you need other people to help you support this ensemble. And it's really important to get other people invested and involved. And this is one thing that I've always had a hard time with. I've spent a lot of my own money on starting up ensembles, and I think in the end what it does is it cheapens the experience overall, because what you're doing is you're not involving other people from the very beginning when they're most likely to be interested in helping you, and then they can bring in other revenue sources as well. And so this is true for both nonprofit and for-profit. Find donors, find investors, you'll figure it out, but don't blow $10,000 of your own savings on it. Next, I want you to make a list of all expenses that you anticipate incurring. So go through the process in your head of everything between now and, say, your first concert or your first 10 concerts, and think about every expense that you're going to have. So you're going to have an expense for music, musicians, venue. You need to include a line about yourself. Are you paying yourself? And one thing that's important with this is that if you're a nonprofit and you're the president of the board, you most likely cannot pay yourself because board members cannot be financially compensated. But if you're the executive director, you can be. And there's a lot of gray area if you're both the executive director and a board member. And so do a lot of research on that and figure it out. One of the questions the IRS is going to ask you is, are your board members being compensated? So you need to keep that separate. Now, if you're a for-profit, of course, you own the company, or maybe you and whoever your partners are own the company. And so that means that all of the profits, you own them too. Not just the company, but the profits that come from it. And what kind of salary are you expecting from this? And it's just important to think about and to have a kind of specific number in mind, and then think about whether it's realistic or not. If you're expecting to make 60 grand from a handful of brass quintet concerts, for instance, that you directly pocket, that's probably not going to happen. But if it's 60 grand with a full orchestra concert over the course of, say, a year and a half, that's much easier to do. So it's just something to keep in mind, is that you are also an expense. So some other expenses, think about office supplies. Are you going to have an office? That's really important. Internet, those sorts of small things also really add up. Even, say, gas for auditions, driving to places, renting venues for auditions. How are you going to do that? All of those can be much smaller expenses, even maybe $20 here, $20 there, but over the course of 6 months, they can add up to thousands of dollars. And so it's really important that you keep track of those expenses as well. So next, what I want you to do, I want you to go out and actually do research on how much all of this is going to cost you. So how much are office spaces in your area? How much are venues? How much will the musicians cost you? Think about are you going union or non-union for your musicians? How much are you going to pay them? What's standard in the area? Go out and talk to people, email even the union. I'll do a future video specifically on the union. But talk to people, get an idea, a specific idea as to how much this is going to cost. The more specific you can be now, the more realistic you can be about your budget. And ultimately, the fewer surprises you're going to have. And almost no matter what you do, whatever your initial budget is, you add 30% just kind of off the board for because you're a startup. Everything's going to cost way more than what you expect. So just keep in your mind that it's probably going to be 30% more. With that, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you learned something about budgeting. Down in the description, I will leave some links to other resources about budgeting, a link to the action sheet for this video, so that you can get started on constructing your budget right now. I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment below. What have been your successes with budgeting? Have you had any failures? Let me know. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. I hope to hear from you. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video. Take care.